Hey guys, welcome back to Conversations in Ken's Café. I'm your host, Ken Somerville. Our guest was stuck in traffic. We all know what traffic is like. Ben, I'm just glad that you made it home safe and sound, my friend. Because I dealt with traffic for decades on the highway. It can be a real pain in the butt.
Yeah. Unfortunately, right now we're dealing with a little bit of an extra issue with our traffic in our local area. The state of Rhode Island, right next door to us, has a beautiful bridge that they've been working on for, I don't know, 15 years or so. They
Okay.
finished one half and then promptly the other half collapsed. So they've been working on it. We've got lanes cut down to one lane right now, but is what it is.
Yep.
Good to see you too,
Well,
Lily.
and construction, like we in Alberta here, we have construction season and then winter. Okay. We have the frost here, so we get a lot of frost heaves, which breaks up the asphalt, and then they gotta fix that. So yeah, it's pothole season and winter time.
Yeah. I like to think that we're professional potholers out here. They've made an art out of avoiding the potholes. It's pretty impressive.
Well, yeah, and like I've literally seen axles ripped off of vehicles as they hit a pothole and just like destroyed their vehicle, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. The government goes, "Oh well, you should have went around it."
Yep, yep, that is absolutely accurate. They like to fight you tooth, claw, and nail on it, but it is what it is. Made it home safe.
Yep.
Was able to make my clients happy with the work that we were able to accomplish for them today, despite things going wrong at the end of the day on a Friday. But life is good.
Well, and that's the beautiful thing, and like you are working very closely with a lot of different people, and globally, by the way, guys. Benjamin goes around the world and does speaking engagements to help people learn about natural farming. So you were working with your clients today. You do both, other normal crops and cannabis crops. You got into this profession really because of your father and what happened with your father. Um, a lot of people do know you, Ben, but maybe just give the new people a quick explanation on what brought you into organic in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. For those of you that don't know me, Benjamin Acadia of Acadia Farms. We've been established now since 2017 professionally. I've been a cultivator for 18 years. I've been doing solventless extractions for 10 years, a bit of other extraction work for about 5. We've been in the industry professionally for cumulatively about 10 years and judging competitions for about 10 years.
Mhm.
The beauty behind where I started was that I never meant to find this path. It found me. And I know that that's so cliche, but it's real. My original path was in emergency medicine. I was very passionate about becoming a CRNA. I loved EROR work. I loved being really hands-on and being able to make a difference in people's lives at crucial moments of trauma.
Mhm.
And I think that's because my own life has had a lot of those moments happen. And the worst feeling in the world is being powerless. So I pursued a path to make sure that I was never powerless in those situations. But when my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer, it was actually me. I noticed a DVT in his leg, and so I brought him to the ER. He argued with me, so I said, "We're going to lunch." So he got in the car and
You sneaky little
drove me to the
fucker.
ER. And he, being the hippie that he was, all organics, all whole foods, very, very predominant about, maintaining ecology and ecosystems. And that's really where a lot of that got instilled in me was my father and my grandparents.
Cool.
And so when we went there, they're like, "Oh, well, you haven't been to a doctor in 20 some years." And he's like, "Yeah, since my son was born." So the last day my dad saw a doctor, not for him, but just saw a doctor, was the day that I was born. So at that point, I was 24 years old. They gave us 3.5 months for him to live. We ended up getting a beautiful 4.5 years, and I attributed a huge amount of that to what CBD did for him.
Yeah.
Uh, when I first got into cannabis, I was recreationalist. I didn't really understand the purpose, medically speaking, behind it. But this experience with him really opened my eyes and showed me the other leverages that it could provide. So I left my program of nursing and took over my father's care full time.
Mhm.
and we got a really, really great path for him. And he was able to be singing and dancing up until 48 hours before he passed. And I think to me, that's the greatest gift that I ever got, was I got my dad back for 4 years.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to take a different approach. I left Western medicine, where my brother was still an active doctor at that point, and we both agreed I wanted to pursue different ways to help people. So that led us to doing education, producing a CBD products line for my family, which ended up evolving into becoming a company, which was Acadia Farms. And it just sort of naturally, organically happened. People started buying the products from my family members. I felt very uncomfortable about that, not having any labels or logos or recommendations or instructions. So I told them stop
Mhm.
immediately and allow me to
Please
establish
stop.
this. Yeah, allow me to establish this as a proper business.
Yeah.
So it took about 2, 3 weeks and put it all together. The initial logo, which has now been refined, was my hands holding one of our plants, and my fiance sketched it.
Mm.
My Acadia Farms name came from my middle name, which my mother and father had been the ones that gave me. So it felt like a good way to carry forth an homage to my father and continuing homage to my mother, who's alive and is an
Mhm.
epileptic, and was one of the first people we worked with. So that led us to going to seminars and workshops and conventions, which led me to leading, understanding there was a just a massive knowledge deficit in the industry between consumers and producers. And I started to sort of just chase down that trail, sort of perpetuating from what I had done in medicine, where I really loved to help. I wanted to do that same sort of thing here. So long story short, after years of doing that, it led me to working with facilities and helping to solve problems. I called it being Sherlock Holmes because I loved detective novels growing up. I loved puzzles, and I have real ADD. So when I learned that I could leverage my ADD to think about all the different active things going on in a facility at one time and sort of see how they're all interconnected and how they're working with each other, it allowed me to start understanding that a lot of these issues that I saw consistently time and time again in facilities all over the country could have been avoided in the design phase. And that
Mhm.
really it was just a breakdown and understanding between the people creating the facilities that understand code and logistics and the way things need to be built to be safe and effective, but also the people that are operating the facilities. And for the most part, it was legacy cultivators transitioning at the beginning,
Yeah.
and the methods that they had that had worked for them at small scale and with minimal to zero regulation just didn't translate into the modern era of the legal market with the legalization and the regulation and legislation that we had to follow. So I was able to help a lot there with bridging that gap. And that led me sort of further down the line to getting into facility design and operations refinement. So that's where we
Mhm.
find ourselves predominantly today at Acadia Farms. We still do a lot of education. I just spoke at NECAN Boston on essentially how to build success and sustainability into your facility from your original design or rework and your operations management. Now
Mhm.
I'll be giving a similar speech to Vermont in a few months at NECAN Vermont, and then moving on down the line, trying to reach as many people as I can, especially in developing markets where the information that I have can be most crucial to facilities that are just getting started. Because if we can avoid pitfalls from the beginning, we can save drastic amounts of capital expense, which then allows us to put that into operations and allows us to put that into sustaining the business and the longevity of the business.
Mhm.
Because every market goes through different waves. The initial wave is the boom. The first movers get in. They're just making money hand over fist. They tend to not secure those funds properly and reinvest them as they should to really make it through the next 5 to 10 years, because you're in a boom and it doesn't seem like it's going to end, but it does. Then there's market consolidation, and all of a sudden prices crash. Lots of people get forced out of the marketplace, and that's sort of where a lot of the East Coast is right now.
Mhm.
And that's where the operations refinement really comes into play. If you weren't able to get the facility initially designed to be extremely efficient and sustainable from the beginning, then the only thing that we can really do is take a facility that's already operating and do our best to rework whatever minimal infrastructure we can with whatever budget is available for the things that are the most necessary. But really, it comes down to the operation, being as lean and efficient as you can with your labor, with your resources, so electricity and fuel and water. These are the
Yeah.
types of things that even a facility that's fully operational can still refine and can still improve on, because we can't get people to pay more than the market's willing to pay. So the only way to increase your profit margins and therefore your sustainability is to reduce operating cost and to get that OPEX down. So that way you're able to produce a still high quality product, but at a lower price point of production, reducing your COGS or cost of goods sold. And that'll allow you to be able to bring a product to market, which is still superior product, but be at a price point that it's very leverageable within the marketplace, even with low prices. And then as the market starts to swing back, we begin to see, maturing of the market, higher quality producers are retaining their names and brands, and then the prices start to go back up as the fall off happens of the lower end producers.
Yeah, and a lot of that, the guys that got in, I know it happened in the US, happened in Canada, where it was just the suits coming in, throwing money in, not having a clue on how to do a greenhouse business, because it doesn't matter if it's cannabis or tomatoes,
Mm-hmm.
it's that understanding the greenhouse business. Anybody growing indoors, you have to understand vapor pressure deficit. You have to understand the different lighting and how it applies to your plants. There's so much to put into a system. So it's fantastic you're able to work with, markets that are just coming online to save them so much at the beginning. Now, do you work with both conventional and organic, or are you strictly, in an organic environment?
So my passion lies with living soils. And that's just because that's what I find produces the very highest quality of terpene and cannabinoid profiles. So for me, I do love that, just like I love solventless extractions. However,
Yeah.
not everyone is on that path and not everyone's business model supports that. So we work with everybody from conventional ag to conventional cannabis to organic ag and cannabis to sustainable and even regenerative ag and cannabis. So at the end of the day, I bring my skills, knowledge, and experience and leverage it for my client, regardless of what their, methodology or finished goal is. But that
Yeah.
is always one of the very first questions that I ask, regardless of whether they're a new facility or an existing and operating facility, is what is your end goal here? What products specifically are we looking to produce? And then rework from the sort of from that goal backwards how we can produce those particular ingredients and those particular things as efficiently as possible. Whether that
Yeah.
means we're going to be running living soils or salts in a cocoa media or rock wool media, they're all viable. It's just a question of what are you trying to do, and then which methodologies and which equipment and which designs tailor themselves and lend themselves most equitably to that particular goal that you're trying to achieve. So if you're trying to produce for instance, large volumes of extractable material for distillate, there's no better option than growing in field, native soil. And you can still do some great finished flower product that way too, but it's a lot more difficult. You need to be really dialed in to be able to produce high quality outdoor finished flower and be able to compete in the market with indoor and mixed light. The next
Yeah.
step would sort of be if you're looking to produce, high quality solvent extracts and finished flower, then a 4-season hybrid greenhouse is really the most efficient way to go. And if you're looking to produce exclusively finished flower and indoor extracts, then indoors may be better for you depending on where you are, specifically geographically. A
Yeah.
lot of the constraint we have to pay attention to is the environment that you are growing within. And even though in an indoor environment you're growing in, let's say, a enclosed box, you still have external influences. There's still a thermal and humidity dynamic that you're going to have to deal with that's coming in from the outside.
Yeah. Most people don't understand that, whether it's heating or cooling, the transfer of air through your walls is where your cost is for heating or cooling. The more you can control the airflow going in and out, the cheaper things become, because you're not having to battle at outside temperature.
Mm-hmm.
Really hard in a greenhouse, easy in an ICF or an insulated concrete farmhouse to do something like that. So, how are you taking that knowledge, that most people don't have construction wise, and applying that into a greenhouse growing, say let's say in northern Canada? Let's give you a hard one because that's where I live.
So if we're going to be doing a hypothetical here,
Yeah,
and we're going to be talking about a greenhouse, are we talking a 4-season hybridized greenhouse, or are we talking your standard traditional greenhouses?
let's talk the 4-season hybridized, because there's
Okay,
so much more you can do with that than just
absolutely.
a normal. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'd say in northern Canada with a traditional greenhouse, you're looking at, 2 seasons a year. With a 4-season, you can run all year round.
Yeah.
So first thing would be proper foundation. Though
Mhm.
I love running in native soil, and that still is viable and a potential aspect that we can do. It takes a little bit more work, but the first thing would be proper foundation with radiant heat floors, potentially using GAT systems, which is geothermal air transfer, which
Yep.
essentially utilizes deep airflow in the ground that stays at a roughly ambient 55 year round, and using that to be an offset for your environmentals, because we already know that right off the bat, HVAC is always going to be your largest electrical expense, followed by lighting. Lighting
Yeah.
we can't do as much of to offset other than using sunlight and doing supplemental with our lighting. But the HVAC, we can do a pretty substantial offset with GAT systems or with deep well transfers, where you have two different levels of water wells where you're able to pull from hot areas and cool areas and cycle those through radiant heat throughout the facility to help to increase or decrease your temperature needs. So
Hmm.
the first and biggest thing in any grow, other than obviously running in field, is environmentals.
Yeah.
I think that that is the single largest and most valuable investment that a facility can make. Lights are extremely important, but they are a much easier transition at a later point in time. And we can get lights in that'll get us good enough to pay off ROIs to be able to get us new lighting much faster than you would be able to ever. I mean, really, it's not feasible ever to consider doing over HVAC. It can be to supplement, to rearrange, but never to overhaul.
Yeah.
So, with those considerations, we would do double thermal barriers and insulated poly for your walls. So, you would have actual
Yep.
solid plastic walls that have an internal thermal barrier. And then we could even put a bubble on the exterior of that of a poly wrap with blowers if needed to create a third barrier of insulation if you've got really, really cold winters. And then in the summers, we're going to utilize the exact opposite offsets. We're going to use passive airflow and active airflows. We're going to use AC cooling. I try to really stay away from Modine units and similar propane and gas heaters because they produce such dry heat. Usually, when you need heat is when it's in the winter, and in the winter it tends to be drier naturally. So you're just fighting yourself on that and having to dump larger amounts of moisture into the air to maintain your VPD, which can cause all sorts of problems down the line. So I'm much more of a proponent of wet heat when possible, but it's not always viable. And I think a great example of how to, it can be done really well on a budget actually is a client of mine from Vermont, Farmhouse Cannabis. They are a small little husband and wife operation. They had a very, very tight budget, and we were able to get them an efficient facility at a really, really, really low price point, to the point where they're going to pay off all of their loans within the first 2 years of operation and be cash
Cool.
flow positive and be looking to reinvest into new lighting as well as into a 4 season greenhouse and increasing their outdoor cultivation profit as well. But what we did with them was we invested extremely heavily into our insulation and our environmental control and our facility design, and much
Hmm.
lighter into other things like irrigation and lighting that we were able to offset and supplement later on. What that
Yeah.
ended up providing them was, even in northern Vermont, like quite north, very close to the Canadian border, they get really cold winters. Not quite like Ontario, but they get very cold winters and quite hot summers. And we were
Yeah.
able to maintain a 1 to 2 degree delta, both summer and winter, within parameters of their set points, which
Sweet.
is phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. They have had zero environmental control issues, and that was exclusively because of the amount of time, effort, and labor that we put into the design, the selection, and the implementation of their environmental control, as well as their insulation and facility. And we were able to accomplish that with traditional split systems. So it's not like we went and broke the bank and put in these big DX units that I like to do in larger facilities, because they really are the best. But
Hmm.
we were able to run more conventional with their environmental control, run splits and dehues, but we were able to do it in a manner in which the systems weren't fighting each other, and they were very successful there. So if we take that and we extrapolate that and we put that in Northern Ontario, we've got a bigger delta that we're going to have to deal with in cold. Not as much of a delta that we're going to have to deal with as far as warmth in the summers. It's going to get warm up there, but it's not going to be getting, middle America hot.
Yeah.
So we've got major delta really is on the cold side. So we offset that by doing insulation, multi barriers, thermal insulation pockets, and then properly isolating and installing the equipment to be able to manage that environment and having redundancies as well.
Well, I think the redundancies is something that a lot of people, don't think of when they're first building a system. But
Of
I wanted to
course.
point out, guys, there's a community here in northern Alberta, which, for you guys, we do hit -40 up here, uh, Fahrenheit, so it gets
Uh-huh.
damn cold up here. But they put in a geothermal system for the entire community, where in the summer the heat gets pumped underground, in the winter it's pumped back out into their houses. This is something that you can do in a massive way
Hmm.
because they're doing a whole community for a greenhouse. So if you're doing a grow, doing a geothermal system like Ben is talking about is one of the optimal ways to save yourself money long term.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I mean, even when you just think about heat dynamics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Heaters are almost always hung high, and then they're angled downwards. But thermodynamics tells us that heat rises and cold settles.
Yep.
So utilizing radiant heat floors, which is one of my favorite techniques, allows you to have the heat come directly from the bottom of the plant area. So you're warming your root zones. You're then warming the sub canopies to the upper canopy. And then your coolest point as far as your heating goes is that upper portion of canopy to your ceiling, which is right where the sun is coming down and where your lights are, providing a secondary thermal point. So, whereas in indoor cultivation, we're really trying to always mitigate the offset of heat from the lights. In a
Mm-hmm.
greenhouse grow, depending on environment, you can utilize that actually as a beneficial offset at certain times of year. So, understanding how to interplay your systems is really crucial. But I'm a big fan of the geothermal, especially with radiant heat, because it allows you, you've got a big cement slab, whether you're running in pots or you're running in beds or you're running in native. If you're running in native, you're going to have your cement slab with your radiant heat run through it, and then you're going to have carved trenches for your permanent native beds. You can still run the piping right through your native beds, so you can
Yep.
still maintain providing heat sources directly to the root zone. Now you need to be careful with the buffers to make sure you don't cook your roots, so proper
Mm-hmm.
calculations are key. But you can do that, and you can offset to the point where you've got a massive thermal mass. Like, are you familiar with mass stoves?
Yes, mass rocket heaters and stuff
Yes.
like that.
So
Yeah.
the concept behind them is you have this large stone mass around your stove, which
Mm-hmm.
slowly heats up as you use your stove and then retains a massive amount of thermal heat that can then produce a good amount of energy for you even when the stove is off. So we can heat the thermal mass of the concrete foundation and then kill the heat, and that'll maintain heat within that space even when your heat's not running. Then you
Yep.
combine that with the geothermal offset, and you can do a really, really efficient product.
Well, yeah, and guys that are looking into this, especially in the northern areas, your north wall is actually a block wall. You
Yep.
don't want anything coming in there, and a lot of guys put up black barrels of water because water retains heat. It's one of the best heat sinks you can find.
Hmm.
So there's all these different methodologies that I've seen and I've experimented with a few of them. What are you finding, or have you done a lot of this stuff for the northern climate where you're using that kind of a thing?
Yeah, more and more these days because people are
Cool.
really starting to see the benefit. It took a while to catch on, but we were doing a lot of work in Maine, New Hampshire, New York, um, Vermont. So those markets that are really starting to come online are starting to really see the benefit now, where people are starting to get more their way from that legacy cultivation methodology and are looking for new technologies because they're understanding that, again, market consolidation, the booms are over in these marketplaces for the most part, and therefore they're really looking for every way that they can, save pennies to make dollars, because that's what keeps the operation running, and that's what allows them to survive these lean periods within the market and then get back to, producing and being less worried about having to meet OPEXs to keep the lights on.
Hmm. So, do you find that the more conventional people are, the less they want to look at this kind of stuff? Like, I know there's a huge mindset difference between people, that have went organic and understand cost wise the difference between organic and conventional. But is the mindset of the conventional slowly waking up to a different methodology?
Yes, and they're doing so through pain points, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I mean, I was part of the legacy market. Yeah, that's it. I was part
Yep.
of the legacy market for a long time, working with people, and I mean, I learned the vast majority of my initial foundational knowledge from the legacy market, from my mentors that had been in Humboldt and in the East Coast and all across the U.S. And they had, things that worked for them, that they were very set in their ways because of trial and errors. But again, when you transition to scale and when you transition to regulation, a lot of those things just don't cut it anymore. And though they are functional at one level, they are not functional at the next level. So yes, I
Mhm.
would say the hardest convertees that I have had have been a lot of the legacy cultivators, especially ones that are much older than I am, that have been doing this for as long as I've been alive or longer. And
Okay, kid, just shut up and go sit in the corner. Listen to the old guys.
yep,
Yeah,
yep. One of my favorites that I get a lot is "You're wrong," and let me tell you why. Um, and I learn from them and I listen to them, and then I
yeah,
decide whether or not I think that it's viable for me to try to provide more knowledge to them and if it'll be beneficial. Because you can lead a horse to water, but I'm not trying to drown it.
yeah,
So they have been a more difficult conversion. The other really difficult end of it has been as you would put them the suits that came in initially. So a lot of the white collar guys coming from Wall Street investment capital, they just didn't understand at all what cultivation really took, and so they thought, okay, just bare minimums. What can we do for bare minimums to produce this plant? And those
yeah,
facilities also really struggle in the long run and usually end up selling off and moving to a new state. That said, I've seen in now that probably the past 5 years, a pretty substantial and rapidly increasing mindset change in both of those parties. The white collar crew has been a little bit faster to adapt because they're bringing really big money on the line and they understand the ramifications of failure to their investors and they can't afford that. So after seeing a number of failures, they've really been like, okay, so clearly there's things we do not know that we do not know. And they're
mhm,
very much more willing to reach out and be like, look, you're the professional here. We're coming to you for expertise. What do we need to do? Though they're still not all of them. I have seen a larger transition in them than I have in the legacy, but more and more legacy guys are starting to come to me. They are starting to come to the conventions that we talk at and are more interested in, okay, what are these OPEXs? What are these COGs that you guys talk about? All these acronyms. And one
mhm.
guy that I met, really sweet old farmer from Kentucky at the last conference I spoke at, old school guy wearing a dead shirt, came in with suspenders, blue jeans, and cowboy
Cool.
boots.
Yeah,
And he's like, "Hang on!" As I'm giving my presentation, he's stopping me. He's like, "What is a VPD? What is a cog?" And he's taking notes, and he's taking notes. And I went and I talked to him afterwards, and he's like, "I'm really passionate about this, and I really want to do it right, but I feel like there's just so much I don't know." And it's absolutely, you don't know what you don't know until you know, and it's usually too late at that point. So
mhm,
I had a great conversation with him, gave him a bunch of feedback and sources that he could start with knowledge points on and start to educate himself. And he was really, an active and adamant guy, even though he'd been smoking longer than I've been alive.
yep,
He was an open book and he was willing to learn. And I mean, though I am a professional in this industry, and I think it's safe to say I'm one of the top in my industry, I still consider myself a student of life, and I still consider myself a student every day. Whenever I go to conferences, I spoke at this last conference, I spoke for 1 hour. I sat in
mhm,
on 3 days of material
yep,
and listened to other people talking to CPAs, talking to distressed data acquisition, talking to lighting and HVAC and irrigation specialists, because there's always more to learn. There's always more to inundate yourself with as this technology is advancing. And there's things that, I've never even heard of that I've been working in this for so long. And a guy came to me with something and I was like, what is this? What are you talking about? What is this? Oxygenating of chloride within the air at such a low ppm that it's antimicrobial but is completely inert and safe to everything and just turns into chloride, which is an inert and safe thing. So plants can breathe it, you can breathe it, it's nothing. And I'm going to do a lot more research into it, but it was just something that I was like, wow, I'd never even heard of that.
yep,
So, even us at the very top of the pyramid, there's always still more to learn. And one of my favorite groups to learn from is the old heads, because there is often cultural and experiential knowledge that they might not be able to quantify. They might not be able to tell you, I do this because X, Y, and Z chemically, but they can
yep,
tell you, I do this and I observe this. And I've correlated in my observations over time and adjustments that there's a beneficial factor with something I do here that results here. And then I like to take that knowledge and be like, okay, let's test this. Let's dive into it with instruments and data collection, and let's start running some bioassays and see what's actually going on here. So that way we can quantify it. And once we can quantify it and understand it, we can make educated and accurate decisions about how to maximize it.
yeah. Well, and that's the thing, because I know there's so many guys that are out there that have been growing longer than I've been alive, and I'm reaching that 60s, but they've seen it, they've done it, they've felt it, they've tasted the difference. They've went from, gorilla grows out in the bush, where Mother Nature had, 99% of the control, to the enclosed environments where they, played with everything. and they've seen all this stuff, but yeah, they don't. How do I explain to you that if I do, tweak it just a quarter of an inch, it makes a difference? But how do I explain that scientifically? A lot of it, is them learning, but a lot of it is us learning and finding the right equipment to actually test this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the science is really still developing. I think, Dr. Bruce Bugsby at Utah State University has been doing just some of the most cutting edge research.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Allison Justice as well, really phenomenal research. And they're providing us with real actionable data that we can make really advanced decision makings off of, which is something
Mm-hmm.
that we've been lacking for so long in the industry. I mean, we're just really now starting to get to the point where we're really understanding the plant's nutritional needs. We've been guessing for the vast majority of time, basing it off of similar plants that there's decades of research on, like tomatoes and others.
Mm-hmm.
And really, only now are we getting to the point where we can have university level research done and get white paper produced that allow us to really understand the benefits of proactive pruning, pinching, topping, etc., doing root exudates, hormones, and understanding a lot of the cultural things that we had been doing, whether they were right or wrong, and getting those quantified and being able to really have actionable data. And I mean, I know I say data a lot, but it's everything. I mean, at the end of the day,
Yep.
this is science, and science is data collection, observation, and then assumptions, and then testing.
Yep.
So when you think about the empirical theory and formulas, that's really a huge amount of what we do at the beginning and throughout almost all of the cultivation process and operation refinement. It's always empirical. And so I always tell people, data in threes, because a single
Yep.
point of data is useless. 2 points of data, if they correlate, might be valuable, but it's nowhere near as valuable as 3 points of data. And if you have 2 points of data and they don't correlate, now you don't know which one of them is accurate. Now you
Yep.
don't know if either of them is accurate. But if you have a third data point that you can reference, you can see where that cluster forms, and then you can make a decision that is very educated based off of that data. So it's amazing to think, like, back in the days, the heads used to be growing, and I'd ask, well, how do you do this? And what do you do that? And what about notes or anything like that? And they look at me, they're like, notes? Are you insane?
The
You want me
cops
to write
get
this stuff
those, and then we go to
down?
jail, you silly kid.
Exactly. I mean, what we call data, what we call, notes and scientific study, they called evidence.
Yep.
So it's very logical why it was hard for them to make that transition to starting to gather data. And then the data that they think of is mostly like functional active data and that day to day yields
Yep.
and stuff like that. But really, we need to be gathering data across the board, because one of the great seminars that I sat in on was a CPA, Tracy, who does Evolve CPA, and she was talking about COGS and how to properly understand your COGS so that you can project out future revenues, but also be able to extrapolate down on what your leanness is and what your fat are. And essentially, a lot of what I do in operations refinement, finding the fat that we can trim in a facility's operation to reduce those operational expenses to increase those profit margins without changing the end price point of the product, and therefore staying active in the market. And she was
Yep.
talking about how so many of these large facilities that we talk about, and you'd be amazed. It's not just the mom and pops grows, big MSOs, even, large scale producers in single states that just are not gathering a lot of the data that you really need to be able to understand, well, what is your cost per gram of production? What is your cost per finished product? So that way we can say, okay, this gram cost exactly this much within the cultivation sphere for us to produce. But
Yep.
then you can extrapolate that further and be like, okay, so outside the production sphere, the chain of command just for literally touching that product, now we have rent, insurance, liabilities, taxes, overhead, which is made up of all of these other things such as packaging fees, shipping fees, transits, programs, tracking, salaries, consultancies, all of these things that have to come in now. And like when you first ask somebody like, well, what's your cost per gram? Most of them aren't equating in what their property tax is or building insurance or their rent or mortgage or the CEO's
Mm-hmm.
salaries or bonuses or any of that stuff. But at the end of the day, those are all compounded portions of what that gram costs you.
Yeah. Well, and that, that's one of the things where you're bringing in a CPA, or a chartered accountant that can figure out all this stuff. Once you have those data points, it's a
That's
lot
gold.
easier, especially if you're dealing with the suits, because that's what they want,
Mm-hmm.
right? We consider it bro science, you know, uh, in so many different ways, whether it's a feeding routine or it's the numbers. it's really bro science until you have the data broken down and can say, okay, it cost me, 22 cents to grow this plant organically, and it cost me $2.22 to grow it, chemically. It's having the numbers to be able to quantify exactly what you're doing.
That's the difference between hypothesis and fact.
Yes.
What you think is happening versus what you can verifiably prove is happening.
Hmm. And then, like, I know I hate bro science, because it really was all we had at the beginning, because
It
it
was
was
the
just you
cultural aspect.
talking to your buddies, right?
Hmm. Yep.
Because you couldn't write it down. Now we've moved into the era where, you can get away from that by just watching YouTube, and learning.
Oh, yes and no. YouTube is both beautiful and dangerous.
Well, that's where I tell people, listen to many voices,
Yeah. Look
right?
for
Because,
consensus.
yes, like when you're doing an experiment, it's not one, it's not
Hmm.
two, it's a minimum three,
Yep.
and
Minimum
the
of three.
better if it's 300.
Yeah. Yeah. The more data, the better. The more
Yeah.
data, the better. I mean, though a lot of people are not a fan of Phylos, I think that they're a great example of that and the
Mhm.
power of data. You take what they had, which was genomic markers. They had cultivators send in genome samples, which is just tissue samples that they were then able to extrapolate the genome out of and then put that data point within a scatter plot. Now, when
Mhm.
you just have a handful of data points in that scatter plot, you don't really have anything. But when you throw 10,000 data points into that scatter plot, you have an incredible trend of data that allows you to literally start at a point and be like, okay, cultivars with disease resistance, pest resistance, high yield, high cannabinoid development, high secondary metabolite development, drought resistance, light tolerance resistance. And you can see exactly which data points correlate to those characteristics. But it's only because you have so many data points that you're able to be like, oh, wow, there's like 1,000 data points up here, and 500 of them are clustered right in this area. What does that mean? And that allows you to
Mhm.
start looking at those data points and extrapolating out the characteristics that are tied to that. And they did a great job as far as being able to do breeding programs, morals questions aside. But scientifically speaking, what they did was an amazing, amazing experiment of data collection to be able to understand the genomic process, which will advance breeding in general in the industry drastically because we are finally being able to breed off of data points rather than breed off of intuition or observable characteristics.
Well, and waiting till it flowers out and tasting and going, oh, this is the one I like.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Being able to
know?
take a tissue sample at a few days old and know exactly what that plant's going to be able to do and what its genomes are is light years ahead.
Yes. And it's something that, people need to understand. Our endocannabinoid system, which is what your THC, your CBD, etc., is affecting in our human bodies.
Yep.
This is a natural thing in our bodies. Ladies, if you love chocolate, when you eat that chocolate, it's making THC in your body. So having THC from an external source like cannabis, can really help to elevate certain problems for the human body. But it's that lack of knowledge and understanding. Is that something that the growers are looking at all for future development? Is tracking the what our human body needs for what they're growing?
Not to my knowledge yet. I think we're still a ways out from that, but
Yeah.
we are beginning to understand and grasp the pharmacology of cannabis in a much deeper way. University of Rhode Island School of Polypharmacy has a great course that I took on cannabis pharmacology and pharmacokinetics, and they did a really, really excellent job of utilizing exclusively white paper studies to exemplify and demonstrate how. And this really clicked with me in my background of emergency medicine and understanding pharmacology to start with single source molecules and just the body's receptor sites in general.
Hmm.
Really, all we're doing with cannabis is we are providing a plant based key to the human based lock, where we
Yeah.
are in some way either lacking or wanting more of the human based keys that we don't have present. So, understanding receptor site locations, antagonistic and pro antagonistic relationships, agonistic versus antagonistic relationships, and allosteric inhibition are really, really key things that are now allowing us, from a pharmacological point of view, to understand exactly how not only cannabinoids but terpenoids are extremely pharmacologically active as well, and I would argue are more important, honestly, than the cannabinoid profile of a cultivar for how it affects you and makes you feel as far as both therapeutically and recreationally. But now that we're
Yeah.
really starting to understand those two major plant sets of chemical structures, and we're
Mhm.
understanding how they are now beginning to interact at a scientific level within our body, I do think that in the long run, we will be able to see tailored breeding towards specific conditions that are very, very large chronic conditions, predominantly things probably like cancers, epilepsies, chronic pain and inflammations. The big, the low hanging fruit is going to be the first thing that the pharmacology industry goes after. So I think
Yeah.
that once we have federal descheduling, we will see pharmacology really start to play a larger role, and we'll start to see tailored production, specifically on the medical side. Not so much on the recreational side, I don't think, just because the value won't be quite as strong there as it will be on the medical side. But I do think that that's a possibility that could come in the future, is having select chemovars that are produced specifically for select conditions because of their chemical makeup.
Well, and I know, like, I had a gentleman named Daryl Fay on the program here a few weeks ago, and they actually have a test, just like you would send in the swab for insurance or ancestry.ca, but it's a test for the cannabinoid system,
Hmm,
and they can tell you which cannabinoids your body is lacking in, so that
really?
you can steer yourself to that. Yeah, it's a newer
Send me a link,
technology.
man. What have you been
Okay.
saving this nugget of gold for from me?
Okay, well, I'll send that to you after the
Yeah,
show. But
yeah, I'm fascinated. I want to do it tomorrow.
yeah, I think they're out of Florida, but they're
Hmm.
working. They have a university they've put together for helping to train, etc. It's a real thing that they're looking at the human body, and you never mentioned flavonoids, the sensory
I was trying to
organs
stay a
that
little
we
higher
have.
level. I wasn't going to go too deep.
Okay, well, on this show we kind of go here, there, and then way out there.
Fair enough, bro. That's one of the reasons we love you.
Oh, well, speaking of energy, frequency, vibration, when you're building a facility, are you looking at things like redox? Are you looking at, you know, especially in an indoor, are you putting in, oofer grounds to ground the beds to the soil structure underneath, or have you looked at that side of it at all?
Like electromagnetic cultivation.
Yes.
So, yes and no. Um, I believe that there is absolutely something there. I have not yet seen enough science to back it up at a scalable level, but there
Hmm.
is something there. It still, to me, is one of those cultural things where there's something, we have observed it, we don't understand it yet entirely, but we're grasping at it, and we're learning things about it, and we're uncovering secrets and little tidbits of data, but we don't have enough data points on it yet to see that constellation, but we're getting them.
Yep.
That said, I have had a few clients that see the value and have been willing to make the investment capital into that. Most have not.
Yep.
I consider it a victory if I'm able to get them to understand the value of infrastructure and insulation and HVAC control. So, I'll drive home the other points when I get lucky and I have a client that's just like, let's go deep into like some biodynamics and electroculture. And it's like, oh, okay. You want to go? Oh, all right. Excellent. But no, that's not my daily. Definitely not my daily. Unfortunately, there's just not
Yep.
enough following for it yet, and there's not really enough science behind it for me to feel comfortable really pushing it. There's
Hmm.
a huge amount of science that I can reference on nutrition, on light intensity, on environmental control, on plant morphology and metabolism, on rhizosphere and microbiology. But I don't have enough data that I can yet really, bring a strong case with unequivocal data that backs the empirical cost of it being installed and the
Hmm.
labor of maintenance and working around it.
Yeah. Now there's we had on with Leighton,
Oh, Leighton,
Harvest
I love him.
Harmonics.
Nice.
They don't do cannabis. The gentleman that developed this is a doctor. He developed the frequencies in the water for human beings
Oh yeah, yeah.
first, and then he went into the agricultural. But he still had the mindset of cannabis bad. Okay. There's that frying pan and eggs are bubbling and your brain is frying. He's still there.
Oh, I had forgotten about that old ad.
Oh, that every time, the old timers up here say something like that, it's like, yeah, your brain's cooking, man. That's what comes into my brain is the two frying eggs, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. It was an incorrect but powerful ad, and it stayed with us generation.
Well, and we're still dealing with this in a lot of the people think that it is this bad, like never touch it, like stay 500 feet away from anybody that does it.
Hmm.
It's unfortunate that our marketing is so adept at triggering the human psyche, because we've been doing advertising since the first newspapers came out, in the probably the 1200s, or probably in the ADs they had something. We've been programmed, and that's where the television programming,
Yep.
okay, is a real thing, guys. you know so Ben, you've been all over the world. There's a lot of people that are doing, let's get out of the greenhouse, let's get into the field. What are you seeing in the field? Because you teach Korean natural farming, you do seminars, etc. How many more people are moving that direction and away from bottle feeding?
Well, in industrial ag, basically no one's using bottles.
Okay.
That is something that is still exclusive to the cannabis industry because we're the only ones willing to pay for water. So everyone else in large scale ag is utilizing soluble salts or soluble nutrients in one form or another. So they're able to buy bulk of granulized nutrition, mix their formulas into their own water on site, and then distribute that to their crops.
Mm-hmm.
And that really just comes down to the fact that the cannabis industry a long time ago realized that cultivators initially in the legacy industry didn't have the knowledge capacity to be able to do that for the most part. So they wanted to make something that was very streamlined, very simplistic. Take this, dilute it to this ratio, put it in the water.
Yeah.
Then it sort of evolved into a huge money grab because water weight is huge on shipping and they can jack the price on the nutrition to pay for that. So in industrial ag, nobody's running bottles. They're all running conventional salt. That said, there has been a much larger shift that I've recognized, not yet to the contentment of, natural farming. There's still some, there's momentum building for natural farming, but that's
Mm-hmm.
really on like, the far end of the spectrum of regenerative work
Yeah.
and conventional ags all the way over there. So there's been a pretty steady shift that we have seen over the past 10 years, specifically in the past like 3 to 4 years, that people are really starting to understand, okay, soil life is key to my success. And I can't just keep stripping my soil and adding in individual nutrients because then you have microbial collapse, colony collapse, you have compaction, you have just a list of problems that begin to set in about 50 years after you start doing it. Or I
Mm-hmm.
mean, really, they start to set in sooner than that. By 50 years, you're feeling the pain, and that's where a lot of industrial ag farmers are at. They're generational farmers that have been working fields, that have been in the family for multiple generations, 100 plus years, and they're
Yeah.
seeing the destruction in their soil and they're seeing the reduction in their yields despite increasing the fertilizer loads that they're putting into them. So they are starting to really understand that there's a necessity, not just a benefit, but a necessity for shift to more sustainable methods. We're not yet really seeing a drastic shift towards the regenerative, but we are seeing a very substantial shift towards sustainable and organic cultivation. There is still a lot of resistance to organic cultivation because a lot of the old timers just don't think that it's viable because, to be honest, a long time organic cultivation as it was being taught wasn't really viable at that large of a scale and consistency. It's very
Mm-hmm.
or it was very work intensive. But again, technology and innovation have come a long way. And now we're able to utilize sustainable and organic methodologies at scale, very, very equivalent to conventional ag, to the point where, though it may cost them a bit more to operate their fields, they're seeing an OPEX return on it because they're having the yields go back up comparatively to the amount of inputs that they're having to put on their fields, which is getting them back to more of a baseline. And then they're
Mm-hmm.
realizing that their soil nutrition is sustaining throughout the year. So they're not having the massive amounts of organic matters that they needed to bring in time and time again. They still need to bring it in, but the consumption of their resources has reduced as they shift into this sustainable methodology. So they're seeing that though there is a little bit more work to it and that there is a little bit more expense to some of the inputs, that the volume, the scales of economy are shifting and actually working in their favor. That they're getting a higher end beneficial product at the end, that they're getting something that holds more value that they can sell for a better price, and they're having more consistency and sustainability within their operation, within their fields and nutritional health. Disease and pest resistances have gone up. So it is, a little bit of short-term pain for long-term gain, but they're generational farmers. If there's one thing that they understand, it's the long play, and they want to stay in this. They want to do this. This is their family's, history, and they want their children and grandchildren to be able to continue to do what they've done and what their grandfathers have done. And I'm a very big proponent of that. One of the very first slides that I show in every one of my presentations is a photograph from Austria before World War II, when my great great grandfather was standing in a field next to hemp plants, using a measuring stick, measuring hemp plants, doing genetic selections for the longest amounts of cordage that he could get, because it was a huge portion of the textile industry and the maritime industry. So he, even back then, was actually looking at sustainable methodologies and looking at, selective breeding and things like that. And so for me, I'm not the first generation of my family to be doing this, though I thought I was for a long, long time. When my grandfather passed, we were going through his basement and found a box of old records and photos, and we realized that my family has a heritage of doing this back in Austria. And he was the first bioengineer working for the royal family there, doing these selections and doing this testing and work. And so it really was a huge thing for me when I found that, because I felt like, I had found not a justification, but I had found a resonance within my own family of being a legacy cultivator and farmer that really, really resonated with me, wanting to make sure that this was around for my great great grandchildren. And I think that a lot of farmers in America and across the world feel the same way. They love what they do. They don't do it because it's easy. They don't do it because they're making billions of dollars. They do it because they love it. And they want to continue to do what they love, and they want to maintain what they have, so that way that their children and great grandchildren can do the same. So I think that has been one of the greatest pushes. And then the economics are also the really big thing that, I think the economics is part of what piques them, that they realize that this is not sustainable with what they're doing, and that they're seeing the diminishing returns. They don't want to lose their farms, and they're like, well, I got to change something, because economically I want the farm to be around for my kids. And then as they start to learn about it more, they're like, wait, this is not only going to economically make it sustainable for my children, my grandchildren, it's going to make it microbially and health-wise sustainable for them as well. Because no matter whether the economics are there or not, if the soil continues to degrade at the rate that it has been over the past 50 years, there won't be arable farmland left for them. So it's really a twofold problem and a twofold solution.
Well, and like I grow up in the Alberta farming areas, so yeah, the passion of the farmer has really very small amount to do with the money as it does with the love of the land and what they're doing, the freedom that farming gives you, although it's not freedom, especially if you have animals, because you're there every single day feeding, milking,
Yeah,
etc.
yeah. I mean,
It's the passion.
when I was running a 280-acre farm during COVID, that was all organic vegetable production.
Mm-hmm.
I could tell you that it both was the most free I've ever felt and the least free I've ever felt. I mean, I was living on the farm in a camper. I woke up with the sun. I went to bed with the stars, because I was never done when sunset went. But I mean, I was doing 14-hour days, 7 days a week. And,
Yep.
it was an absolute trial and battle of attrition, but it was a labor of love. And I wouldn't have changed a thing about it, because though I was absolutely a slave to the farm and to the plants at the same time, it was the most beautiful and freeing experience, being able to grow, 5 acres of 100 different varieties of vegetables just for the local community to provide, and then providing to New Paltz, New York, providing to our sister farms in Florida and New York, and being able to provide for 2 different CSAs. It was, especially at a time such as COVID, where, supply chains were so strained and people couldn't get their hands on a lot of food that they needed. It was such an amazing experience to be able to have, little kids and families come to the farm and look at the plants in the field and be like, wow, look at that tomato. Can I have that tomato? And I'd be like, yeah, you can have that tomato. And I'd go get that tomato for them and bring it back to them. And they'd be like, oh, it's just, it's unlike anything else.
Yeah.
I love what I do, and I do what I love. And I'm a firm believer that persistence and passion produces quality as long as you have perseverance.
Well, and a little bit of knowledge does help, just to get it going a little bit better. But I think we've got about 6 minutes left for an hour show. I think what I'd like to talk about just for a few minutes
Yeah.
is the future of Acadia, sorry, family farms. Where do you think you're going to be going in, let's just say, 5 years?
In the next 5 years, well, I mean, we've already pivoted quite a few times throughout our existence. And I firmly believe that the art of farming, and specifically the business of cannabis, it's all about the
Mhm.
art of the pivot. It's about understanding where, when, and how to pivot to stay sustainable and to stay active and profitable in the market. I've been very lucky in the sense that I've been drawn, for the most part, to where I need to be based
Mhm.
off of the need of the people that reach out to me. We don't do any marketing. I mean, beyond coming on podcasts like this or speaking at seminars and conferences, we don't do any marketing at all. Everything we have is organic through referrals and through people seeking knowledge. And I think that in and of itself has really allowed me the gift of being able to find myself where I am most needed because the people come to me
Mhm.
and they tell me what they need, and I adapt and pivot and respond to meet their needs. So over the next 5 years, where I think we'll really find ourselves, and what we've noticed in the past year specifically, is less in facilities design, as a lot of the facilities specifically in our demographic area of the East Coast, have mostly been built at this point. It's consolidation within the market, and so we're seeing a lot more mergers and acquisitions. So we've been working with clients now, helping them with either distressed facilities and helping them shift them back to a profitable situation to either be sold off to a new person or to maintain the clients that have already been operating it and just get them back into the black. And
Mhm.
so what we've been working with there, I think, is really going to shift into operations refinement. Um, Really, over the next few years, I want to gear myself towards helping the people that are in the market stay in the market, stay productive, stay active, not have to close their doors. And at the end of the day, that's going to come down to education and operations refinement and really helping them just produce a more lean and sustainable facility operation, and just providing my knowledge and experience and leveraging it for people to help them to avoid the pitfalls where they can be and respond to the pitfalls that they've come across and be able to stay in the industry for as long as they can, because I'm not interested in quick money grabs. I'm interested in helping people build legacies. And I tell my clients that right from the start. Anybody that's interested in just, like, I want a quick wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, like, get me in for a year or two, make a bunch of money, get out and be done. It's like, okay, that's cool. And, I'll work with you to some extent, but my heart's not going to be in it. My heart is really in helping people build legacy foundations that are going to be generational. And
Mhm.
that's, maybe it's my old school family mentality of the way I was raised, and that things should be cherished and passed down through families. And, you have so many people, last names of Smith, Tanner, Taylor, Carpenter, Boxwright, and those were their professions. Those were their jobs. Their last names came from what they did, and that was what the family's craft was. And I think that
Mhm.
that's such a beautiful thing that a lot of people have lost these days, is the heritage of family craft and the knowledge and nuance that can be passed down. And I want to help people to build those foundations so that they can have that and to perpetuate and push forward into the future, into new generations. So over the next 5 years, my hope is really to continue to help those that I have, to reach more people and just spread the knowledge and education that I have been gifted with by people smarter and more knowledgeable and more experienced than I. I always tell people that nothing that I bring to the table really is unique or special. My gift is that I've been able to take so many people's decades and decades of experience and understanding and knowledge, extrapolate it and sort of distill it down into the really raw essence, and be able to make that very readily digestible to people. So that way people don't have to spend 20, 30, 40 years with trial and error, making mistakes and learning from this, and can skip sort of to the end and be able to achieve those goals in a much shorter timeline and with the funds that they have available.
Well, and that's how I learned that it's all about the biology, because I learned from everybody else. I listened to thousands upon thousands of hours of content from all over the world, brought it all together and put the puzzle pieces together like you have, Ben, and went, "Oh, well, geez, this only makes sense to do it this way."
Yep. Yeah, it's amazing how it's like a jigsaw puzzle where when you're putting it all
Yep.
together, all you see is little traces of patterns and little things like, oh, that's a border edge. Oh, these two colors match. But then when you've put all of those pieces in their place, you can suddenly see this big picture and understand all of it. And that's really a beautiful and amazing thing. That's one of the things that I love most is being able to do that puzzle piece work. And I
Yep.
love it. But I mean, honestly, man, I am so jealous. I wish I could be a podcaster to some extent because I am so jealous of people like yourself and Leighton that are, just able to talk to people all the time and just learn and absorb all of that information and be a sponge. And I mean, my favorite thing to do is be the dumbest guy in the room and get to learn and be a sponge. So I'm very jealous of the beautiful experience that you must have been able to have and extrapolate. And I'm honored to be part of it.
Well, thank you. And I'm honored that you come and share what you have learned and your experiences and your knowledge with the world because, you know, my just sitting here being a talking head is boring is for me especially. I like to have conversations, right?
Yeah, yeah, same.
It's so much easier to have things flow mentally and for people to remember, and that's goes back to that marketing, guys, where if I'm just here talking, it's not as memorable as having myself and Ben here. And for the guys, they want to see the hot women. For the women, they want to see the hot guys. So that's why I brought Ben on, because at least I got a hot
Oh,
guy here
I
now,
don't know
right?
about that, brother, but thank you. I appreciate you. I'm just a soil man. I'm just, I'm a plant nerd. I'm a soil toucher.
Yep.
I'm a passionate person.
Well, and that's the key to what you're doing is that passion in your heart. And I thank you so much for bringing your great grandfather up, and the being in hemp back then, because that was the textile industry, that
Yeah,
was the sailing industry. The Boston Tea Party had nothing to do with tea, it had everything to do with the hemp crop that
yep,
was going to be shipped back for to make rope for the Royal Navy, who was going to come
yep,
and blow up the Americas. It was all about hemp.
yep. No naval ship would leave port without hemp seeds on deck because they knew that if they ever got stranded anywhere, that they would not be able to get sails and ropes necessarily to make it back home without
Yep.
having that hemp seed. So they would have it on stock, and just in case, worst case scenario, they knew they had 6 to 8 months in a location before they'd be able to come back home based off of that getting that cordage.
Yeah. And it's amazing that we've lost that, or that it's been hidden from us, that base knowledge from back then. And it went from every farmer in America
Yep,
had to grow hemp.
it was
They
required.
would be end up in jail if they didn't,
Yep, it was
to
required.
being, if you're growing hemp,
You
you're
go
going
to
to
jail.
jail.
Little bit
Make
to
up your
come.
mind,
Little bit to come.
guys.
You know what I mean? Very, very simple and straightforward.
Anyway, guys, we've been an hour. Ben, thank you so much. I'd love to have you back on once a month at
My
least.
pleasure. Anytime, Ken. Anytime. I'm always open for you.
Oh, that means a lot, Ben. Thank you so much,
My
guys.
pleasure.
Ben from check out his website. I know I've been kind of a bad boy because I didn't bring up your website. You've got two different IGs as well. You're on
Yep.
Facebook and LinkedIn. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
guys,
Feel free. Anybody reach out to me. I try to be very accessible and open. My website has my direct email as well as my phone number. So
yeah.
I try to be very, very open to anybody that wants to get information, learn, looking for advice, needs help, anything.
Well, and that's one of the things we love about you and this industry as a whole is we are more accessible. We will help people, you know, just be the person inside of yourself that you would want everybody else around you to be. Treat
Hmm.
everybody with a smile and joy and happiness. It makes a hell of a big difference in life, guys. Stay happy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Hey, Ben, stick around. Everybody else, we'll see you tomorrow. I don't have a guest for tomorrow's show, so I'll be the talking head again. We'll figure out what the topic is tomorrow. See you guys.